Hey folks, Steve here with a special Axis Empires Ultimate Edition video for you today. This is another video in our Dice of Decision playthrough series, and in this video we're going to be focused mostly on strategy discussion because Dice of Decision has served up a very non-traditional start for 1937, and we're going to need to really talk about uh, what can each faction, each side in the game, both Krieg and Dai Senso, do to win. There are different constraints now, and we really need to talk through some of them because they're actually pretty interesting. So, if you have not watched the previous videos, just a really quick recap. Most of Europe is communist. That's because I sort of pushed results in a chaotic direction, and it wound up being very communist in Europe. That includes Britain, which is a moderate form of communism, and having to have had to hand over Northern Ireland to Ireland. That's something that happened. Um, but the rest of Britain is largely okay. They have lost control of Egypt to a existing Ottoman Empire. Turkey has expanded and controls the Middle East, much of the Middle East anyway, and Egypt. So, pretty significant change up here for the Allies with that. Now, France also held communism and is unprepared, which reduces its capability to respond, and is a neutral minor country, which means it's treated much like countries like Italy and others. Um, Speaking of Italy, Italy is communist, and both Italy and France have Soviet influence applied to them, which means should Germany fight France or Italy, it's very likely that they will align with the Soviet faction, and that is a sort of tough situation. It's like a soft entente. It feels like Germany doesn't want to have to fight France and Russia at the same time, even if France is even weaker than it normally would be. But something we need to watch out for. North Africa is independent for the most part. Besides Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, Tunis, Libya, all independent miners. Spain is not in a civil war, but did have Basque break off from it. So there's a very strange bit of change there. And then we also have the Austro Hungarian Empire in existence here, also expanded, taking up a good chunk of sort of that central to Eastern Europe area, holding Czechoslovakia, Bohemia, Hungary, Croatia, Serbia in their control, which puts a really interesting spin on the overall start of the game because Germany, maybe rather than trying to Anschluss Austria, needs to build up some allies. So, Germany needs to rebuild the Central Powers alliance, try to influence Austria Hungary and Turkey, ideally, to give them some allies on the continent because they are not necessarily communist here. Um, and at least not explicitly anyway. Now, for the rest of Eastern Europe, out towards Russia, Poland is still independent. The Baltic states are independent. Belarus is independent. Ukraine is independent, and the Caucasus is independent. So when we talk about victory, remember that victory is determined by strategic hexes. So when we talk about strategy, it should be aligned to gaining control of strategic hexes. Well, Russia in particular is kind of in a weird spot because the only strategic hexes that they control uh, is, let me make sure I count this right, five. They have five strategic hexes under their direct control in Leningrad, Moscow, Kuibyshev, and the two out past the Urals now. The Soviets don't necessarily care too much as long as these other countries stay neutral. If they stay neutral, then it's not that a big a deal, because the Axis doesn't control them. But if Germany were to get, say, Belarusia or Ukraine aligned to the Axis, that would not only give the minor country force pools to Germany, but would also hand them effectively a large number of strategic hexes for maybe not a lot of effort. And that is something that is going to be um, weighing on the minds of all three players in my brain because The diplomatic game is super duper strong here. Really, really important, to be honest, because that is the method by which we're going to see the borders congeal. So a huge factor here in Totaler Krieg. And I guess I should say, for strategy's sake, I'm going to talk about Totaler Krieg map stuff first. So that's kind of the rub here. Now, how else can we deal with this? Well, Germany is a constitutional monarchy in this game. They won World War I. They made some moderate reforms, and they are technically considered a democracy. So why is that important? Well, there are no other democratic major powers anymore. Shockingly enough, the U.S. is also communist, because I again I pushed for chaos. This is um, highly unlikely to happen in most dice of decision games. Like, you really have to go down a very specific set of dice results for the possibility that the U.S. could be communist. Um, so, again, typically not likely, but I sort of pushed things in this direction because I wanted to see what would happen. So the US is communist, Britain is communist, France, Italy communist, Russia is still communist, but importantly, Germany is a democracy. And what's really important for that, and this is going to be a change from what you would expect in a base game, is when you go and you take over a minor country, you take control of their capital, their cities, etc. Ordinarily, as the Axis, you conquer said minor country. And then, if you're lucky, maybe you play a card and you can liberate a country as a new Axis minor or something. But you tend to just conquer stuff when you take it over. However, this is part of the dice of decision ruling. If your faction's ideology is better, and there's a sort of a rating scale there, if it's better, then you liberate. So the socialist ideology is better than fascism in the rating system of the game. So this is how you can have in the base game Soviet faction liberating Axis miners and sort of turning them into Soviet allies. And obviously, in the normal game, the Western allies are democracies and they liberate countries, right? Well, now Germany gets to do that. So, because Germany is a democracy and democracy is better than socialism in terms of the ideologies that the game puts the framework into, uh, Germany as a democracy, or however you want to look at it, it's a constitutional monarchy. So that's the best democracy we can get right now. Uh, Germany can take over a minor country, for instance, and liberate it. So, part of that big fun thing of the regular game is the Allies coming back into Europe, taking territories, liberating other countries, being able to get those units into the Allied force pools, not having to garrison their backfield so they can send more forces to the front. All those kind of neat little advantages uh, are actually with Germany now. And importantly, what this will mean is, if I think anyway, if Germany can liberate some countries, even when the communist U.S. and Britain come to the continent, they are going to have to garrison territory, because at least I think, once that country becomes liberated and it is the democratic version of, say, France or Italy or whatever, if the U.S. comes in and invades, they are going to have to keep some of that territory occupied because they're conquering it now. Once these countries have democracy, it's harder to keep them down. So they will no longer be liberating countries. Germany is the one doing the liberating. So there's a lot of different ways that's going to help us. That's going to help us in the immediate short term. When we knock certain minor countries out, we'll be able to pretty immediately switch them over to our side. We're not going to have to garrison. We can move on. We may want to garrison just to protect the territory, but importantly, we'll get their force pool, or at least some of their force pool. We'll be able to spend minor production steps to bring them onto the board and help form their own garrison, or even send other additional steps along with the Germans in whatever direction that they're heading. So this could be very, very important. to the overall picture, you can imagine, um, if we can get into, uh, even the Denmark Norway, and we conquer Norway, all that will happen is that we will flip Norway to us. And the way that that's going to work is once we have declared war on a minor country, or however we come to blows with that minor country, they're going to align with either the Western faction or the Soviet faction. Both of those factions on the Totalkrieg map are socialist. So, however you want to do it, right? You can, and you're going to have to make up some logic in your brain, right? This democratic Germany decides to go to war with Norway because they've got socialist enablers, and we're going to go you know deliver those people from communism, and we're gonna flip their government to something more palatable. And so, in some ways, Germany is able to operate as this sort of expanding, you know, commonwealth of democracy on the continent. And I think that's a really interesting shift and thing to keep in mind. And again, this could work for countries in Eastern Europe. So even if we had to conquer Ukraine, because we couldn't diplomatically align it, Germany could still liberate Ukraine effectively, and um, use their help against Russia. So there's a lot there to unpack. Russia is also unprepared, by the way, though I have the marker in a different place. So Germany has a lot of these sort of advantages, but the challenge is going to be distance. So while Russia is unprepared, by the time we come to war with them, which might involve fighting France and Italy first, Russia has time to get prepared, and where the chips lay with these minor countries will be kind of up in the air. And in fact, Russia could simply, demand and collapse some of these eastern countries like Belarusia or Ukraine or the Caucasus to kind of get back control of these things in the pre-war period. Um, but it kind of advantages the Axis a bit here because, one, we don't need to worry as much um, about places like Bessarabia or the Baltic states being taken over, because Russia, in the way that the cards are set up, they would have had to have taken these areas of Ukraine and Belarusia before they encroach on the territories that historically they did. So there's a bunch of funkiness there. Now, with all that strategy, explained, there's going to be some common things, right? The U.S. and the Commonwealth, the British, are going to operate well together. They're going to have generally naval supremacy, especially once the U.S. joins in. And so there's going to be some aspects of the campaign that we should expect to be similar. But again, I think there's just a whole lot different here. It's going to force us to make some different decisions. Case in point, I'm going to switch the camera view here to my rough plan of action for Axis card play for the pre-war period. Okay, so set up on the other side of my table, I've got a lot of the play raid cards and force pools and all that good fun stuff, but I did lay out my rough, general, iffy plan for pre-war as Germany. So this is the German card set. It's gonna be it's gonna be tough to figure out what's gonna work here. So obviously we have different sets of cards from the regular game. I did look at the historical sequence to kind of see like what's the cadence. So a couple of things. We have the rearmament cards, but we can only play them basically uh, one per year. And so there's sort of a rough order of card play that I need to align with. Got to get the rearmament cards in there somewhere. Um, and then I need to get prerequisites handled. So that structures a certain amount of ordering. And then with some of our cards changed, I really have to think about like how do we want to operate here? If we rely too much on demand cards, that doesn't really shift us anywhere any better, and we don't get the growth and capability that I think we need. I think Germany needs allies. They need to build a coalition on their anti-Comintern crusade. So my initial thought here is at the outset of the game, we're going to use our diplomatic mission central with the idea that we want to ideally get some influence into Austria Hungary. That's kind of a critical thing. Austria Hungary is a reasonably large country. I'd rather have that country as an ally and use it as step fodder. This kind of makes up for the fact that, in the regular game, Germany would be allied with Hungary, would have Anschluss Austria. The difference here will be the Austro Hungarian force pool is bigger than the Hungarian force pool, right? So we're going to try to do that, get some influence out in the central area, which the tricky thing is we don't know exactly what countries will get affected here, but it could be Austria, Hungary. It could be, well, yeah. I'm gonna have to look at some of this because I think there's a little trick here where if the country doesn't exist, you don't actually get the influence. So we kind of have to hope for certain die rolls, but um, this is using the dice of decision area tables. There's some goofiness here. I'm gonna have to double check, but ideally we get influence in Poland or Austria-Hungary. That's really what would be beneficial to us to get some of that out there. So that's one. Some early investment in Austria-Hungary. This is different. What normally would have been played in the historical narrative is supporting nationalists, but Spain doesn't have a civil war, so there's no civil war to kind of invest resources in. Instead, we're going to lean into diplomacy. Then we're going to do the Goring Works established, ideally, and that will get us a part of spooling up for war. It's a sort of a needed card to get out the door. Then we're going to get German rearmament, so that's going to get us again geared up for war. And then yes, we are going to do military purges, and we'll end up ditching a few demand cards to play it. Now we are going to do that because many of our Ribbentrop diplomacy cards need military purges. So to keep up this sort of uh, quote unquote diplomacy set of activities, I've got to get the purges out of the way. So I don't know what you want to how you want to consider that. Either you'd say, hey, the military advisors are purging fascists and communists out of the German military. I don't know. When we get into 1938, so this is all 1937. If this is 1938, we're going to have Ribbentrop diplomacy. Good card because we're going to get some units out of it, and then we're going to have um, some some other die rolls around neutrals pressured or German supports nationalists. I don't know. I'm gonna have to. Case in point here, folks. I might find that this isn't actually the right good card to play at this point, and I may change that. But I don't need to make that decision right away. I can wait a few seasons. But by the time we get to November, December, I'll have to decide if this is the card I'm keeping. The intent was to be able to do some actual diplomacy, but I'm gonna have to double check if neutrals pressured actually gets me what I want. Um, then in the summer, we're going to be having a diplomatic mission in the Middle East, and that is ideally going to get us Turkey. Now, the same sort of thing applies here. Middle East, there's a different set of things that could come up. So, like Syria and Iraq, they're part of Turkey. So, if I read this right, there's a strong chance I don't actually get the thing that I want. But if I can get Turkey or Persia, I mean, I'd take some diplomatic influence in either of those locations. That will be a big help to us. So we want to be able to get that diplomatic successes out there. We want to start getting some influence in the Middle East. I'm not sure, what else I can do there, but that's going to be an attempt. Again, we just need to get a little influence out there. We need to try. And then we have Demand Danemark. So I'm picking this card. One, we get some more steps, which is good. And then I think it's an easy grab for us. Um, it highly likely that we'll get ceded land, and we will get control of the Denmark area. That will then enable us to be pretty well positioned to knock out Norway very, very quickly. We will be able to operate very, very swiftly to take Norway. And I'm thinking I'm going to have to do it. The strategic hexes are still there. Maybe in this political climate, you'd say, in our game, this campaign, maybe Sweden wouldn't matter as much, but I think, or not Sweden, I'm sorry, Norway. We, I think we've got to take Norway. We've got to have a plan of action to take it. So I want to get Denmark out of the way. That will give us a good jumping off point to then take Oslo from a friendly controlled territory. So we're going to demand Denmark in the fall of 37. We're then going to, I'm sorry, fall of 38. Then we're going to continue rearmament. Then we're going to have more diplomacy. Again, I might have to change this if it doesn't quite hit what I'm looking for. And then we have Pact of Steel. Now, um, this is an interesting card because it requires us to have completed our card 3, continuing rearmament, and total war is not in effect. And what this allows us to do, this removes the Nazi-Soviet pact, which, you know, is a choice. But we're going to select one treaty minor country and apply influence. And ideally, what I'd like to be able to do with that is either finish off aligning Austria-Hungary, or kind of catch up and potentially get a few other countries situated. And I could use that to, if it's feasible at this point, who knows where we'll be at in 1939, because this is a 1939 card. I could nullify the influence maybe of France or Italy and kind of get them off our back for a moment. Um, those are the things I'm looking at with Pact of Steel. It seems like a really strong card for a diplomatic play because we basically just get to drop some influence nearby, and I think that's going to be really important for us. Finally, I expect the war to get kicked off around here, where I'm going to demand Gau Mosland. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly. We get some more units, but what I expect to have happen here is this is going to force our invasion of the Low Countries and is going to put us at war with Britain. So what I would like to do is expand my influence, try to nullify the Soviet influence in Western Europe so that I can focus on the West and get into the Low Countries, get into France, be fighting Britain uh, potentially first. And you might think, well, wouldn't you want to have the Nazi-Soviet pact for that? That might be the case. I might be making a big mistake here, but I don't know. I could alternatively switch this around a little bit and say, well, yeah, I'm going to fight. I'm going to focus on weakened Russia and try to get something going on here. And instead, I might try to swap this card out for demand Poland or something, or demand or do something else where we can get influence in Eastern Europe and we can get Ukraine on our side, something like that. So some of these, again, this is tentative. I don't have to commit to this plan, but I'm just trying to frame out something that's gonna work. So this is the initial idea, and then I expect by this card, this card 5 for German mobilization, that um, pre-war will be over and we'll be entering limited war, in which case our card selection is going to open up a lot and we'll have to make some decisions there. But I don't need to make those decisions now. But I think this far out, this is definitely like the the general plan. I'm going to have to make some pivots along the way because while I can plan all of this out, well, both the Western allies and the Soviet players are going to have their own cards. They have changed up decks, and what they decide to play might affect what the Germans do. But from the outset, this is a rough plan of action. Expand diplomatically, try to position the global, the European stage such that we're not fighting a whole bunch of communists all at once. We can try to focus effort, leverage our allies, gain strategic control of these strategic hexes. Pulling in Turkey would be great via the Middle East options. and then we're able to operate from there and force the communists' hand. Let me go grab the cards for the Western Allies, and we'll talk about their same card strategy next. Okay, so here we are looking at the Western Allied card selections, or at least my plan. Now, there's an important DoD rule here, dice of decision rule, as it relates to option cards. That your various cards are going to have a prerequisite. So requirement, say card 3. There's a number of cards on here in front of you that are going to say card 3 French rearmament. Well, the option card selection of the Western Allies have been dramatically affected by France's disposition. And so the card 3 that says French rearmament is no longer in the deck. Now, the special rule is that if you have a requirement on a card that says card 3, whatever it says, so long as you have a card in the deck that has the same number, you can still play that card. So, for instance, Arab League, Little Entente, Scandinavian League, these several cards all require card 3 French rearmament. Instead, we have card 3 continuing rearmament. And because we're going to play that card, we will be able to play these other cards. So keep that in mind. So it's not a total crapshoot just because France isn't in. We can still do some of the same card play. It's just leaning on a different card. And the different card has different things attached to it. So let's talk about our options here. Because of the loss of France, our bandwidth of potential flexible options is reduced a great deal. So the choices here were actually pretty easy. It's just a matter of trying to figure out like what can we do here. And it's really tough because I have to try to pretend like I don't know what the German card plan is, but it's almost like, these are just the cards that I have. It's more about the order that I'm playing them. So first things first, we're going to start with negotiations with Belgium. Now that's the historical first card. We're not going to get a French step, unfortunately, but we will get some diplomatic rolls. This is an important card to play because most other cards in the Allied deck require either change of government or rearmament to have occurred, and we almost don't have any other options. So this negotiations with Belgium is almost like a must play. You've got to get that out on the board. So we're just going to start with that, get that out of the way. Then in the summer, we're going to have change of government in the hope that we get those 3 political event die rolls and we can do our own sort of socialist camaraderie diplomacy game, get stuff under our protection as Britain. We're going to have British rearmament in the fall, so kind of get that started, and then this will have us play the Chamberlain diplomacy card in the December timeframe. And of course, it's not really Chamberlain; it's whoever the book says would be the sort of communist labor whatever person. So we're going to do that. Now, this is a recyclable card, which means after we play that diplomacy card, we can play it again. And I have it positioned here to reflect that. So going into 38, we're going to have continuing rearmament. This is an important card that's going to get us access to a lot of other cards once we're done playing it, which is why we have to play it early. Then we're going to do Arab League. So the thought process is, yeah, boy, the Ottoman Empire, wouldn't it be nice to maybe come to some kind of understanding between Britain and the Ottoman Empire, respect the annexation of Egypt, but form some kind of alliance or support some kind of coup that overthrows the Ottomans and have some kind of socialist revolution. Who knows? Then we'll also have British guarantees, which this is a DoD card that replaces the previous guarantees card. So this is again to hope to shift perspective or shift activities a certain way. We want to prioritize possibly aligning Turkey, but the British guarantees will be important. We'll follow that up with more diplomacy. And then in the 1939 timeframe, we want to be doing initial mobilization, again, get this out early, and then hit Little Entente, which could allow a play for Austria-Hungary or other Central Europe nations. This could see the Scandinavian League, so we can get Scandinavia in our alignment, and then the Western League, which will allow for play in the Western region, which just looking at, and this is a DoD card as well, you can see these R's are what denote that. Um, the Western territory will be useful for aligning Portugal, France, Spain, Italy. So it'd be kind of nice to pick up Spain there. Would be kind of the pickup, because otherwise we're going to be messing up potentially the Soviet influence, which as a total allied strategy we probably don't want to do. So this is why this is going to come last, because I would expect war maybe is breaking out at this point. So if we end up having to, as a last ditch thing, put some influence into France, then we'll do that if we have to. So unfortunately, for the Allies, like there's not, it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of flexibility here, and a lot of this, amusingly, while Germany really wants to be doing diplomatic stuff, Britain Britain has a lot more diplomatic capability at this point, trying to recoup from all their other losses. They're going to be making a big diplomatic play. So it's going to be diplomatic play against diplomatic play in the pre-war very significantly, and that is really going to be up to the dice to determine, who comes out ahead on that. So it could be Germany finds itself very diplomatically isolated and could make for a really challenging game. It might still be interesting to fun, a fun try, but it could be a very tough start for Germany if the diplomacy doesn't go their way. But this is the basic framework I want to operate in. I don't expect as much to change. So where I think Germany's card play is going to have to change with kind of how things play out. I think this is a pretty set card order. I don't know that the Allies really have any true options to swap things out and expect things to be significantly different for a change there. They don't have as many options. So, okay, let's go take a look at the Soviet options. Okay, here's the Soviet card plan. Very much subject to change, I think. And it's really hard because we have to make a choice. Russia is in a very strange position, having lost a lot of territory in the aftermath of World War One and the Russian Civil War, which is tricky. If Russia is belligerent and attempts to, say, attack Ukraine to get Donbass or whatever, if we demand that, and I do have demand Donbass down here, what could happen is that country simply resists, and basically Russia is further entangled and weakened, and potentially that country could be more allied to the Axis and hand over strategic hexes. So the Soviets are going to have to make a pretty big play to try to get diplomacy out on the board and convert some of these minor countries into allies. And so we're actually going to pursue a very different sort of Russia, one where maybe Stalin is not in charge. Hard to say. So we're going to start with Tukhachevsky's reforms. So that's the first card. That's actually a pretty big change. We are not doing military purges. So we're going to go for a coalition Soviet Union. We're going to create a true union of communist states to try to snuff out Germany, I guess, in the big scheme of things. Which means the next card is going to be collective security. That's going to start us down the path of getting diplomacy out there. Russia already has a decent bit of diplomacy, or rather influence, out there in France and Italy. So let's try to expand that into the central area, or Western, or the Balkans. Any of those would be valuable, especially early on, to invest in the communist states that are in Europe. Then we're going to do the Ostland Pact. That is a diplomacy card and an attempt. It's a DoD card, I should point out. But one of its requirements is collective security, or political purges, but we're going to do collective security. We're going to try to get Ukraine and or Belarusia or somewhere, somehow, somebody to get some influence. And then potentially our demand on Donbass won't matter so much. Then we have Litvinov diplomacy. That's another collective security diplomacy oriented card. That's going to allow us to roll on the guarantees table and conference table. So again, just looking to make up for the fact that we've lost territory. We can gain it back with allies and bring those force pools with them when they do. We're going to have the new 5 year plan at the beginning of 38. That's just something we kind of need to get out because there are some cards that rely on it. Um, we're going to have negotiations with Belarusia. Ideally, that allows us to finish up reabsorbing Belarusia into the fold, and we're going to do that rather than demand Belarusia. We're going to have negotiations as such. Then we're going to have Russian rearmament, and then we've got the Central Alliance card. This is another collective security branch card that's going to give us more diplomacy influence in the central area. So if you can't tell, all three factions are going to be playing heavily in the diplomatic space. And I think that's going to make for some interesting interplay because each side's going to have an opportunity to roll, get a result, apply a tug of war. And it could turn out that, Germany's not going to have much choice. They may have to declare war on a lot of minor countries they would have rather have been allied with because they've got no other choice. Going into 39, we're going to see continuing rearmament, and then they're going to try to play Nazi Soviet pact. So what's the deal with this? Well, I kind of had the other option might have been the entente with France, France, Francais, but we couldn't quite like. There's no point to play that card because France doesn't have its own posture. France is basically a minor at this point, and it gets treated that way for posture. So really, this is the only card that makes sense to play, and Nazi Soviet pact is going to make its posture and that of Soviet miners to pact. That's going to at least extend Russia's um, protection over to Soviet miners, all those countries that by this time we should have seen a lot of Soviet influence spreading around. This should solidly put them in a strong position to have a united front if Germany chooses to face off with the Soviet alliance, and then a lot of the other stuff that we're used to seeing. So this is going to be an interesting card to see just how this is going to work out this late in the game, and then we're going to finish off that year, with some Molotov diplomacy. Again, more diplomacy. We figure war is going to be starting around here, so we might as well try to get some stuff out. Um, there's one danger of me playing Demand Donbass here. It's just that Russia's posture has to be packed or pre-war is not in effect. So the risk right now, if I keep the idea to play this card, which I mean, a couple of years is going to go by before we have to decide to change it up. If Russia's at war by this time, then the card won't be able to be played. If pre-war is not in effect, then this card won't be able to be played. So this can only really stick around if if war happens, it's because Germany has gone to war with the Western Allies. That means Russia's posture would still be packed, and we could still play Demand Donbass. I'm really doing it for the steps in the HQ. I'm less worried about the other results potentially. Uh, and ideally, maybe we will have already aligned Ukraine by this time. So I'm not sure. We're probably going to change this card before all is said and done. But for now, I'm putting it there. There's not that many good alternatives at this point with the strategy that we're going to have to pursue with collective security. But it is going to be the game plan for the Soviets. We're going to go for a very different feeling Soviet Union in this game, which is cool. I mean, I like that. I like that this is going to be a bit different. We're going to have a different set of cards that are going to influence the board, and the capabilities of these factions are going to have to morph along with that, which is some neat flexibility in the system here, and the cards keep it relatively organized. So, okay, those are all the card plans for Totaler Now, if you're watching this and you've got some experience with Totaler with the options cards, with or without DoD, if you see any glaring challenges or problems or alternative thoughts when it comes to the card choices for the three factions here in Totaler please let me know in the comments section down below. I'm definitely interested to hear what folks have to think about the strategy here. I don't know what I'm getting myself into because of how different this game is from classic World War II. I don't know if there's going to be a really sticky hinge that things are going to get messed up on, but we'll see. It's going to be exciting one way or another, or it'll be amusing to watch a very quick victory from somebody on the map, depending on how this goes. All right, from here, I'm going to switch gears. We're going to start looking at the Dai Senso map. We're going to begin with the Axis card options for Dai Senso. So let me first get over to the Dai Senso map, and we'll talk about kind of the situation again, a reminder of what our Pacific map is looking like, and what things we need to consider. Okay, so for Dai Senso, not as much is extremely different on this map from a classic game. Japan remains a totalitarian country, which means that the liberation advantages that Germany is going to enjoy in Totalkrieg, Japan does not get. So as we venture into neutral minor countries as Japan, we will conquer them. We will not liberate them. So that much will be pretty similar to a standard game, which I part of me wants to go back and change it, just to kind of help make this a very different game. Um, but I'll accept this as the game stands. I don't want to overdo it. So with this, Japan is going to be treating this not as a war of liberation against the communists, but really still an opportunistic campaign. In particular, because we have obviously seen the Western powers suffer some revolutions. The status of their influence has changed a lot. Britain remains strong, but Indochina has broken away, with France kind of falling into chaos. So there's a new minor country on the board that could be influenced. Um, in northern Asia, it's a very different diplomatic situation, and it might be kind of hard to see and appreciate at this angle, guys. I'm sorry. Kazakhstan is an independent nation. So is Siberia. So is the Far East Republic, which is really interesting because those locations hold strategic hexes. Well, Kazakhstan doesn't, but Siberia, Kazakhstan. um, I don't know why I'm talking weird today, guys. Siberia and the Far East Republic hold several strategic hexes. And it's going to be a really interesting question on, does Japan try to do something diplomatically there, or do they try to attack them outright? And if they do that, they're going to need to do it, before either the Soviet Union or the Western Allies can put guarantees or protection over those two countries. Japan would obviously want to take out the Far East Republic first, gain control of that, and then move into Siberia. And then, should they come to war with the Soviet Union, they're already fighting in Siberia, which has a lot less defensive terrain than Irkutsk has in the main capital of Siberia. So Russia would be fighting at a very tough, disadvantage at that point. And even if the Soviets were to make progress, they're slowly making progress through that tough defensive terrain. So the go north option for Japan is actually really attractive. It's just, what shape does it take with the neutral minor countries, rather than expecting to be fighting with Russia immediately? And that's kind of the tough situation to determine here. Now, the other change we need to keep in mind, so we've got Sichuan as neutral, which is good. Sichuan's a tough province to try to get into, so having it neutral for the time being is helpful. Maybe we can align it later as Japan. Hopei shouldn't be that big a problem, but the one tricky bit here is that nationalist China and communist China are under the same pact, so they will be working together once we're full on in conflict with the nationalist Chinese, or the communist Chinese, whichever. They're basically going to have a more united front. We're going to have to watch out for that. That's going to be a challenge to deal with from the get-go, so we'll need to be ready when we expect to be fighting there. We're going to have to lean really hard into it. Now, the other big shift here is the German Pacific Empire exists, but we'll likely see it being purchased by Japan, which will allow Japan to take ownership of Rabaul and Papua and have a really easy hop to Port Moresby if they so choose it. So we kind of have, there's incentives either way. We can still try to focus against Britain and get away with some nice advantages like having Rabaul from the get go. And that will immediately help us project strength out into the Pacific. It's just we're not going to have pre-existing detachments, which could be its own problem in investment of card play to get the bases out there. So it's kind of it really is a weird sort of set of plays here of like what's going to make the most sense to support. I'm not sure there's a good clear answer here. Now, one other thing we should keep in mind is that because America is the U.S. is communist, there's something here where like the Philippines may be given independence at some point, in which case we could see some kind of play for the Philippines that's going to work out a bit differently than usual, to where the Americans would have these sort of colonial units they could use in the Philippines. That's going to work differently because of the card play changes of the Allies. So Japan's kind of in this really weird position of like they could do a lot of different things, but if anyone is familiar with Japan's experience in World War II games, you usually, if you play Japan, you never quite have the resources you need to do the things you want, and so you kind of have to just accept some lesser version of progress, or making do with what you can. I think that's going to be the trick here is Japan. Like there's some opportunities here. We're not necessarily positioned to take advantage of all of them, unfortunately, and that could hurt us. I mean, if we look at what happened in Totaler Krieg, just because a lot of new neutral miners exist doesn't mean it's really good for the Axis. And in fact, the Allies can use diplomacy to just, make the differences non impacting. Well, here it'll be interesting to see what the Soviets can do to try to reclaim Siberia or the Far East Republic. But I don't feel Japan is particularly advantaged in this start compared to usual. They're going to have to invest card play to get the German Pacific Empire. They're going to have to invest in card play no matter what to just focus where they think they're going to focus. There's no clear, like, aha, we are in really great shape for this reason. It's all going to be a challenge as we look to get started. So, all right, let me go work out the Japanese Axis card layout and figure out what is achievable here, and we'll talk through it. Okay, here's the Japanese plan out through 39. Um, and I'm not sure how I feel about it, but it's going to have to do. I'm going to make some changes. We're going to start off with Army program, which is the historical option as well. I know we're going to be fighting in China, and honestly, I think we're going to be fighting in Russia as well. And so I do think Army program's a good start. We're going to demand Inner Mongolia, the uh, much like the historical narrative, and we're going to expect to probably have to fight for it, which should trigger limited war to some degree. That's the expectation anyway, but we'll see how this goes. If for some reason it doesn't, we'll have to adjust this whole plan. Next, we're going to take care of that Japanese purchase and get Rabaul and those other German Pacific territories. It makes sense to try to get this done early before any war is breaking out. Otherwise, um, because it requires that there is not a war marker in the Western European box and that Britain's posture is not war. So the earlier we take care of that, the better. I'll want to take care of that pretty quickly. And then we'll have Japanese mobilization. That's just something we need in general. And then I'm going to make a shift here. We're going to do political program instead of Navy program. This could be a very disastrous choice. I don't know. These different programs, there's Army, Navy, economic, and political. I'm going to go political because I feel like this whole campaign is a very diplomatically oriented campaign, and I want to see what I can do with that. So we're going to try political program. That's going to give us the Showa restoration marker. That's kind of a key thing. It allows us to, on occasion, combine steps with colonial units. Normally, Japanese units and their colonial units cannot combine. In the organization step, that marker allows us to do that in a limited capacity. It has a few other benefits as well. So we're going to try that out and see what the lay of the land is. Because what I expect to have happen here is we're going to be focused a lot on beating up China. But as our political capabilities improve, I want to make a try at diplomatically influencing the Far East Republic in Siberia or something like that. I don't know it's going to work out that way, but I would surely like to try. And then we're going to see the expansion of our first army expansion. We're going to do Operation Wu Go, which is pretty closely aligned with history. I want to make sure I make progress in China. Got to do that. Continue our mobilization, and then we get into some of our diplomatic overtures along with a second army expansion. So my desire to have as a robust an army as we can sustain, so that we can continue to make consistent progress in China, have consistent progress against Russia when the time comes. I want a strong army, so we're going to do that. We're going to have more diplomatic overtures. We're going to have shortages in 39, because I'm going to have to play that at some point. At least I think I will have to. So I'm going to do that on the historical time frame. Now, I already feel like I could go into 1940 and 41 in terms of card planning. I'm not going to do that right now because some of this could get thrown way off. Um, but I kind of have things set up for us to be able to uh, continue to lean into this, either sign a treaty with Britain or something. Um, if we got really lucky, and in fact, I might change that order. Um, what would be really nice is if we could somehow diplomatically influence the Far East Republic or Siberia to where we don't have to fight Russia, get them under our control, if that's even possible. I'm not sure that it is, and then go to war with Britain, and work our way into India eventually by marching through the Chinese territories, march through into China. Maybe we can diplomatically influence into China, or something. Who knows? I really feel uncomfortable with the plan here for Japan because it just feels like I don't know what's going to go wrong. I think the dice of decision impact on this is kind of making me second guess what we should do here. So, in particular, if you're watching this and you see an error in the plan, let me know. I do feel a bit odd with the Japanese purchase. Maybe I shouldn't do that and just let them be German. And then when there's war, we'll get credit for the strategic hex and Rabaul. Um, and we're basically like not investing in the sea stuff at all. But my thought is, well, I don't know that I need to be too much. Let the Americans grab Pacific holdings. I'm going to be too busy taking over the main continent with my big army. Ideally, I don't know. I don't know if there's something really wrong with this one, guys. Please let me know. I will make adjustments. I think we've got we'll obviously have time to adjust. It could be, again, we're not even in limited war, and some of this stuff will have to be changed anyway, and we'll be stuck in longer pre war. That's entirely possible. Usually in Dai Senso, it sounds like limited war comes much earlier than Totalkrieg, and that's just sort of with the history, so we need to be prepared. We need to be prepared for that. I think we're going to have to deal with that eventuality here. So, um, we could switch out Demand Inner Mongolia and have a very different pre-war. So sometime between now and the actual start of play, I might have to show cards again and say, "Listen, I decided to make a different choice." But until then, here's the tentative thought and strategy for the axis on the Dai Senso map for Japan. Next, let's go look at the communist Western allies and the U.S. Okay, well, here's what I've got for the Western Allies, and to be honest, I'm apprehensive here because I think so much could change with what the Western Allies are going to need to do to react to the Japanese aggression. So we've got the Cyan Agreement out there, if only because I don't know that I have a much better card to play, because this at least gets us some additional political events. Nationalists and communists are already in an agreement together, so I don't really expect to get that out of the Cyan Agreement, but maybe there's something else we can get. We really don't have a lot of great beginning options that I'm willing to take and operate. Now, the cooling declaration, that's an obvious one to get some rearmament for the Chinese, and then the rest of these: quarantine address, relocate Chinese industries, aid to China, Chinese production. These are all cards that are going to have to help in this limited early phase where we expect the war to start with China to just prop them up and help them out. Now, I could have a last minute change on the Cyan Agreement card. I do think I need to look at the Philippine card because, to be honest, the Philippines are going to be a very weak place. And even if the Japanese are focused on um, the war in Asia, they could still conceivably try to get into the Philippines. So I'm wondering if I should stick the Philippine independence card in here somewhere to try to bolster that. Because as it stands right now, there's not a whole lot of steps in the Philippines. There's just the American step that starts there. And without the Philippine U.S. Army card, we lost that because the U.S. is communist. We're not going to be able to put colonial units to defend the Philippines. So the Philippines are actually right now even weaker than they would be historically unless we gave the Philippines independence, in which case their own steps could be used to garrison the country and provide some additional defense until the Americans could arrive to help them. But I'm not sure where to fit that in right now. It would maybe replace Cyan Agreement, so I may make a last minute change before the start of play. But this is where I think we got to start with. It's got to be heavily Chinese oriented because that's where the fighting is going to start. We are going to have to look at British rearmament, US rearmament, but that can come a little bit later into 1938, 39, and 40, depending on how the rest of the events go. So kind of a tough situation. I don't think I can make any better forecast right now. We're going to have to carefully watch events as they unfold and try to support from there. And then we're going to finish this up here with a look at the Soviet cards, which is going to be really, really interesting because the Soviets don't have very many cards to begin with to choose from. And their options are going to be even more affected by the loss of huge amounts of their uh, East Asian territory. Okay, yeah, here's the Soviet card picks. I think I have this set out to 39 with some reasonable expectation that this won't change too much. I think the reality is the Soviet faction, Dai Senso, just does not have a huge number of options. They're really fairly limited. Um, and I mean, this may be the best that we can do here. What I found is that there aren't very many cards that allow us to respond to the loss of the Far East Republic in Siberia. We do have Demand Siberia on here. I would like to get that out at some point, if only because we need to get an HQ on the board if the Russians could hope to have any sort of fight against the Japanese. So we're going to start with Mongol purges. That's to get the Soviet miners in alignment with Russia um, and just put some kind of support over Mongolia. Um, and then we have pact with China, that is to support the Chinese communists. I think we just need to lean into that. Same with aid to China. Asian diplomacy is kind of our one opportunity we might have to get some kind of diplomatic support on the board. It's going to be pretty tricky. Like that's kind of our one option, and I'm hoping we can do something that will shift the picture here. What I may even do is swap these a bit to try to get more bang for our buck there. Um, so we may move Asian diplomacy somewhere down here for a summer turn. I'm not sure. But then we get into new 5 year plan. That's a prerequisite for some additional cards. Chinese insurgency because we need to support China. We know there's going to be a lot of fighting in China ultimately, and then we have Russian rearmament to try to get some more Russians on the board and to get situated better. This spot is blank because we may play Chinese insurgency again. This is a recyclable card. This is based on the historical card map, which I think we need to really look at because that, given our lack of options, it's a reasonable way to go. I also want to get some pre-war production and get some more steps onto the board, continuing rearmament to get some more things situated. I could swap some of these up as needed. And then I expect to do some recyclable card, either pre-war production or Chinese insurgency in this spot. And again, Demand Siberia just lacking anything else I feel like could really make a big difference for us. So really, really hard to see what Russia can do besides support the Chinese communists. I think that's the very best thing they can hope to do. If Japan gets foiled in China, that can allow for a response. I did look at the potential to play the card that sets Russia to neutrality and just have the Soviet players say, like, hey, if you think you're going to make progress against me as Russia, you've got another thing coming, and try to flip it. But I couldn't figure out if that was going to be a good move, because for all the army building that the Japanese are probably going to do, not that the Soviet player is supposed to know that, but assuming that they go that way, the Japanese could just as easily kind of swing their army in China, focus on India, or make their way out to India, and neutrality with Russia doesn't really shift anything. So I decided not to include it here. But again, like with all of these options, we have opportunities to swap cards out because we don't have to plan out this distinctly. We always are basically thinking one card ahead. We have to play one card ahead, and you probably want to think about the card after that. So we could make changes to this. I'm not too worried about the 1940 to 41 because I think that the table will tell us what we need to be concerned with at that point. So yeah, that's it for the Soviet card play. Let's wrap up the video here. Okay, in terms of wrapping up this video, folks, hopefully that was insightful on what I'm thinking for this coming campaign and what we need to try to do. It is really interesting just how different Dice of Decision makes planning. I think if you were looking at this like any other 1937 start or a 1939 start, right, the broad strokes of history kind of pushes us in very general directions. And while even in the base game, you can use the option cards to kind of do different things, here it feels really wide open and it's hard to calibrate just what are the consequences of all of these things piling on each other. The nice thing is we can continue to adjust our strategy as the game goes on. And I'm sure that it's just going to be very chaotic no matter what we do. And the fun here is not to be, competitive and to win based on known constraints and variables here, like you may get more in a classic game. I'm playing by myself here, so who cares? However lopsided it gets, how chaotic or kooky it gets, we'll certainly play through much of the campaign as we can reasonably do and see and keep it interesting. I think no matter how we do it, there's a lot of fun to be had with this scenario, and it'll create for a very interesting narrative. And maybe just because it's alternate history, I feel enraptured, or not, maybe not enraptured, but I feel caught up in the narrative that we're creating here, right? The framing of the world is very different. That makes for an interesting story, no matter how the war goes, no matter how lopsided or strange the results may be. It'll make for an interesting tale. I mean, imagine invading Italy from the north as Germany. Is that what's going to happen? We don't know for sure. Are they going to have support from Austria-Hungary? I mean, I think no matter how these things play out, it'll be interesting. I think it would be boring if in the mix of all these diplomatic plays from all the factions across the pre-war period, at least for Europe, we don't get some alignments. If we get some, like, everybody stays neutral or uncommitted, that could be a little boring. That could be a little unfun and not what it could be. So hopefully we get some good results from all of that. We'll figure that out along the way. I think we're about ready to rock and roll. So in the next video, we will start with the spring turn of 1937 with the world in front of us here. And we'll probably look to play through spring and summer, if not more than that. Understanding that we're not really moving around units very much in the beginning of all of this, I think it's worthwhile to play through more. So it could be in the next video we just do all of 1937. We play through all the pertinent cards. Maybe we get some limited war in China, and then each video thereafter we'll try to knock out a whole year if we're not moving around a lot of units. And then I would suspect by late 1938 or 39, going into 40, we're going to have to do, much like I've done in my previous playthroughs, like a season or two per video as things slow down and there's a lot more to cover. I still expect to move pretty quickly at some point and just say, okay, guys, the war is going on. I'm going to play through a lot and show the aftermath of it rather than talk about each individual thing, because this series would just be overly long if I did it that way to that extent. So anyway, I do implore you, if you're watching this and you're familiar with Axis Empires or Dice of Decision, though that's still pretty new, and you have thoughts, advice, guidance to provide, I am more than happy to accept all of that at this point, because we are really wheeling and dealing, freestyling it here in the game room. Any any insight is very much appreciated. In an absence of that, hopefully this will be an entertaining playthrough to monitor as a viewer from afar. So anyway, see you in the next one, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Take care, keep gaming. We'll see you in the next one.